Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Morgan Jameson. Today we are joined by Karla Bruce, the Chief Equity Officer for Fairfax County. Karla, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Morgan.
Absolutely. So, as Chief Equity Officer, there's a lot that goes around the One Fairfax policy. Can you please explain to us what the One Fairfax policy is?
Sure. So the One Fairfax policy is a policy adopted by our Board of Supervisors and School Board. It was adopted back in November of 2017. And in a nutshell, it's a commitment that our boards will consider equity in all of our planning and decision making. But I think it's important to understand why that policy was adopted. And I actually have a graphic that might be helpful to help sort of build a better awareness of why our board adopted One Fairfax.
Sure, absolutely. Let's go ahead and put those up on the screen here.
Yeah, there we go.
Fantastic.
So everybody knows that Fairfax County is a great place to live, learn, work, and play. People want to be here. A lot of people move to this area. It's an outer jurisdiction of the Washington, D.C. area. There's a lot of opportunity in Fairfax County and the broader region. But what we know is that there is an uneven opportunity landscape, if you can think about it like that, that opportunity that is available to some in Fairfax County is not available to all. And we are looking at, why isn't it available? We've known this for many, many years. And I think in many ways have tried to address this lack of opportunity. I think what our board came to understand is that what's happening is really predictable, right? That opportunity is not available to certain populations in certain areas of the county. So this is a map of the county that was developed in a report called the Getting Ahead Report, the Uneven Opportunity Landscape in the Northern Virginia region. It was developed by VCU with support from the Northern Virginia Health Foundation. And it identified these areas of the map in yellow. And what the report referred to these areas as is islands of disadvantage. Now, the terminology is a terminology that I don't necessarily agree with, but the point that it makes, I think, is really important. Is it talks about these areas as having higher levels of vulnerability and lower levels of opportunity. And when you look at these areas, you also see that these have a higher concentration of lower income people, as well as a higher concentration of people of color. And it leads us to understand that if we're going to address this, we're going to have to not just focus on services for the people or services that really in policies and practices that focus just on the whole county, but that we understand the specific situations and conditions in these areas and focus our strategy on those places and on the systems that are producing this spatial inequity.
That's fantastic to know, and thank you so much for sharing that. I think that all of us here in the region are aware that there are some pockets, or in this terminology, islands of communities that do need a little bit more than others. So when talking about this and talking about, equity, which isn't equality, it's not doing the same thing across the board for everyone. It's being intentional. And we've had shows in the past that we have addressed that topic. And if any of our viewers are interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend that they check out our YouTube channel to see on that. But how is the county trying to do some of the governing and managing of the equity here. Sorry to steal the title off the next slide of your presentation.
Yeah, well, that's a good prompt. We can go ahead and put that slide up because I think that that'll be a good visual for the audience. And that's exactly the point, is that, One Fairfax as a policy isn't a program. It isn't an initiative or something, that you do once and keep moving. It really shifts how we govern and manage in the county. It's really more about understanding our current situation in the county and how we got there. Like I said, it's a commitment that our Board of Supervisors and school board will consider equity in all of their planning and decision making. But this idea of considering equity is really about, first and foremost, not just looking at the current situation, but taking a step back to consider our history and how we got into the current situation. The other thing is sort of thinking about, are we comfortable with where we are now, right? And thinking about what we want for the future. Because if we want something different in the future, if we want a Fairfax County that's going to be more equitable in the future, it's going to require establishing some priorities and making some choices, right? About how we're going to achieve that vision. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. So it's going to require doing things differently, right? So, you can continue to do the same things and produce the same results. And again, that would suggest that you're comfortable with the current arrangements. To have different outcomes, it's really going to require that we have bold approaches, innovative approaches, do things that perhaps we haven't done before, so that we can see some different results. I think, though, most importantly, it's about connecting with our community, right? Because we don't hold all of the answers to the challenges of inequity in the government, right? We need to be talking to the people who are most directly impacted by our policies and practices and procedures. We also need to be working with other institutions, because it's the actions of government as well as the actions of other public institutions and the private sector that create the conditions in our community that our residents experience, and again, sometimes experience in inequitable ways. So I wanted to share this graphic with you because it really represents how we think about this work. We base it on a framework that was developed by an organization called the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And it's a pretty simple framework, but I think it's been very helpful for us as an organization to ground ourselves in how we're changing, how we're governing and managing to advance equity. And the elements of this framework are as follows: normalize, organize, and operationalize to achieve a vision. And in this case, our vision is One Fairfax, a place where everyone has the opportunity to participate in our vibrant economy and thrive. Now, to do that, we really want to focus on, first, normalizing the fact that there is inequity in Fairfax County, that even though it's a great place to live, learn, work, play, and learn, there are places and there are people who aren't living to their fullest potential. And our understanding of why that isn't just about individual level deficit, right? It is about the very communities in which they live and how they are able to access opportunity. So normalizing that, I think, is important. The other thing that's important to normalize is the idea is that these trends are predictable. These trends are predictable by place, and these trends are predictable by race and other social categorizations. So before, you were asking about what the One Fairfax policy is. It is a racial and social equity policy. And our definition of equity is one where race or other social categorizations are no longer a predictor of one's ability to achieve success, right? You shouldn't be able to guess, because of a person's race, how well they will be able to do across a number of life indicators. And right now in Fairfax County, and frankly in other areas of our region and of our country, that's the case. So we want to be comfortable understanding that by acknowledging race, what we're able to do is to understand how some in our community are experiencing our systems, our structures in our communities, and not able to live to their full potential. So understanding that's one thing. We also want to be able to organize our efforts to do something about it, right? We want to be fully trained and aware. We want to be able to work across departments within the county. And as I said earlier, work with the community so that we can operationalize and achieve a goal, right? This is not linear. This is cyclical. We are, we're never sort of finished with this. I should have apologized to you earlier that in my office, the lights go off sometimes. So
it's all right. It's all right. There was a fire engine going around my apartment. So,
okay. That's life, right? But we want to operationalize, right? This is not just a vision we want to articulate, but we want to see change. We want to see outcomes shift. And to the degree that the things that we're doing are helping us to, as some might say, move the needle, that's good. And we want to continue to do those things. But if we're not having the progress that we would like to see, we want to be able to change and course correct. So that's what I'm saying. This is really, this is a way that we govern and manage. This is how we think about our success in Fairfax County.
And when we talk about, organizing, around, equity, we are talking about that holistic approach of, the public, private, all the institutions and making that whole thing there. I am going to ask our producer to pull up the third slide there, because I didn't mean to suggest that we couldn't show that when I said, let's go look at our, previous shows. Can you explain to us the difference between equity and equality? Or if you wanted to finish out on that second slide, feel free. We'll take it from
No,
you.
we can hop to the next slide. That's good.
So what's your definition of equity and equality and the differences?
So, like I said, from the definition that we use is pretty simple. It's that we no longer want to be able to predict a person's ability to achieve success based on their race or other social categorization. So based on their sex, based on their age, based on their ability. We want to be able to create opportunity in Fairfax County so that all people, regardless of their situation, have the opportunity to achieve. We also think about it being fairness, not sameness. So Fairfax County is a large county. Across the county, there are different situations and conditions, which leads us to understand that we can't do the same things in each area of the county. We want to be fair, right? But we can't think about things as the same because situations and conditions are the same. The communities that live in the areas are different. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on understanding what those differences are. So this graphic is what I'm sure many have seen a variation of it before. It's something that I borrowed from a chief equity officer colleague in North Carolina, but I thought it does a really good job. It really sort of helps you to see if you can translate this to understand that we're all working to achieve a goal. So in this case, the goal is seeing the soccer game. But we're situated differently in terms of our access and our ability to achieve that goal. In other versions or other variations of this graphic, you might see, three kids attempting to watch a ball game. And when you give them all the same box, they aren't able to have the same level of success because one kid is tall, one kid is short, and giving one box isn't going to be what helps them achieve the goal. The challenge in that type of graphic, though, is that it introduces a scarcity narrative. It suggests that in order for one person to get a box, somebody has to lose a box. So we really sort of reject that notion when we think about One Fairfax, because we have a tagline for One Fairfax. We all do better when we all do better. So by understanding particular situations and conditions by population and by community, and enabling people the the support, the resources, the infrastructure to be able to thrive and meet their full potential, yes, they're achieving benefit, but that benefit is also available to everybody, right? So, and when you make those changes, those benefits are benefits that often end up supporting better outcomes for everybody in our population. So in that last graphic, one of the things that you'll notice is that there was a difference in not just the fact that each group has a box, but the very ground that they're standing on is uneven. The fence that they're standing behind is really kind of slanted. So again, depending on how you're situated within the structure, you are likely to have a different outcome. And we really see that as the role of government, kind of producing, regulating that structure that people exist in. So our focus is not really, the people themselves are different, but they don't have lack. It's not about their lack. It's about how they're experiencing the systems and structures that they exist in and how those systems and structures are contributing to different outcomes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is fantastic. Thank you, Karla, for sharing that. And that's honestly a great definition, because I had previously seen the one box for each, and, the notion of scarcity. I think that that's fantastic that Fairfax County is throwing that out. And thank you for heading up that charge. You're right. We all do better when we all do better. Speaking of doing better, this is a newer role with Fairfax County. How long has this position existed, and how long have you served in the role of Chief Equity Officer?
Yeah, so I'm Fairfax County's first Chief Equity Officer. I've been in this role for a little over 3 years. The position was established in June of 2018. I've been, however, I should note, an employee of Fairfax County for over 22 years. And so that experience working primarily in human services really gave me an orientation to how things are in Fairfax County and how individuals, particularly the most vulnerable among us, are experiencing the county. And so it gave me a good sense of that uneven opportunity structure and how people are experiencing it. So the position was established with the responsibility to support our Board of Supervisors and our executive side to build a strategic framework to implement the One Fairfax policy. So that's the focus of the role in a nutshell. I was the first Chief Equity Officer in Fairfax County, and frankly, the first Chief Equity Officer in the region. Now other jurisdictions across the Northern Virginia region and the broader DC metropolitan area have Chief Equity Officers positions. Again, people utilize the roles slightly differently depending on their circumstances, but I think it really represents a commitment of our local government and local governments across our regions to take equity seriously and to center it in their policy and practice and decision making.
And Karla, that's a perfect segue to my next question before we get into a little bit more visual here. But you mentioned that that you got that graphic from another colleague who does the same type of work in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Is there some type of organization, or how many equity officers are there, not just across the region, but, is this a new emerging trend across the country, or where does it seem to be focused?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not the first in the nation. There have been other equity officers across the country. I think sort of historically, these roles were often focused on discrimination. And in fact, Fairfax County has 2 offices. It has an Office of Human Rights and Equity Programs that is responsible for administering our local human rights ordinance and all federal and state law that pertains to protecting the rights of people against discrimination. But I think what folks came to understand is that beyond discrimination, that there are deeper inequities. Like a discrimination is something that happens at the individual level, and is a reflection, and we handle it mainly at the individual level. What we're looking at in the chief equity officer roles is how do you tackle these issues at the more structural, institutional level to have impact at a population level. And so some jurisdictions have, in addition to focusing on that individual level, have also adopted these positions that are focusing more at the institutional and structural level. We've been a part of an organization called the Government Alliance on Race and Equity that formed about 6 or 7 years ago, as a group of jurisdictions committed to recognizing inequity in their community and to implementing government policy and practice to address it, acknowledging, frankly, government's role in producing inequality and inequity, in looking at how policy and practice can be shifted to address it. So at last count, I think there are probably across the country about 400 chief equity officers in different jurisdictions. Again, they function slightly different from place to place, but there is a growing acknowledgement that that is an important part of government work at the local level.
And we have two. We have one who serves our Fairfax County Public Schools as well. So
that's right.
We are at quite an advantage on that front. So that's really great. I'm curious, what steps have you taken internally and externally to not just promote the role, but promote the work of what you're doing? And I think that we have some more visuals for this as well.
Absolutely, if we can pull that up. So I really think of this work as inside and outside work. It's really important that that we as the county build up our infrastructure to do what the policy directs us to do, which is to consider equity in all of our planning and decision making. And so a lot of what this work has involved on the inside is training and technical assistance across every county department to ensure that every county department understands how their work relates to the inequity we see in the community, and have a sense about what actions they can take to address that inequity. The other part of that is, fostering partnership and alignment across departments. And so, each department has an equity lead, that has been designated by their leadership to spearhead that department's organizing and training efforts. But beyond the equity leads, we have formed them into what we call our One Fairfax core team, which gives them an opportunity to build relationships across organizations, because again, it's not solving an equity one department at a time. It's realizing sort of how we can all work together to strategically integrate our policy and practice. But it's all in support of the action that our Board of Supervisors took in adopting the One Fairfax policy. So that collective leadership at our board level, at our senior management level, is really important to support the work that's happening within the organization. Again, department by department, and where we find that we should be working more together to address inequity. So that's more of the inside strategy. On the outside, part of this role has been to work closely with the community. So you can switch over to the next slide. I think that inside-outside strategy is really important, because when we build relationships with folks on the outside, that's how we begin to learn how the doors of opportunity are either opened or closed to different populations in different areas of our community. What's driving that inequity? That comes when we have relationship with community. And we've put a lot of effort into more inclusive community engagement practices so that we're hearing from a broader range of voices in our community. we want to be able to have this as a value of our community. We want to have the broader public will in our community to support equity. Again, recognizing, like our motto says, we all do better when we all do better. This is not about helping one group, but understanding how the success of all groups really help us all. And, I think the sort of the solutions that will help us to overcome inequity in our community can't be found just in government. Like I said, it has to be found because we're working with partners, and it has to be found because we're working in partnership with communities, and particularly those who are most directly impacted by the inequities.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and joining us thus far on the show. I want to circle back to what you were saying about some of the internal work in the department to department. A lot of the work that happens in the county is done not only by staff, but also by volunteer board, authority, and commission representatives. And it's my understanding that you've taken this acknowledgement of the One Fairfax policy across the board and implemented this to everyone. Can you explain the thought process behind that in the few minutes that we have left in this half?
Sure. Our board thought it was important. And in fact, when we developed the One Fairfax policy, which, if you're interested, is available for viewing on our One Fairfax webpage on the county's website. But the board, it was important to incorporate all the aspects of how we do our business. And so this policy applies not just to staff, but to our appointed boards, authorities, and commissions as well. And so back maybe about a year and a half ago, the board made the decision that each member of our boards, authorities, and commissions would acknowledge that they received the One Fairfax policy and were familiar with the concepts behind the One Fairfax policy. We developed a training video that we've made available to all members of the boards, authorities, and commissions, and hope that all of them have had an opportunity to view that by now, or if not, we'll be able to do so in the near future. But again, they're an extension of our organization and representatives of the community. So it's very important that they too understand that inequity exists in Fairfax County and that we have adopted a framework for how we'd like to address it.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Ms. Karla Bruce is the Chief Equity Officer for Fairfax County. I'm your host, Morgan Jameson. This is Inside Scoop. Stick around and join us to further the discussion right after the break.
As they head toward the finish, Warren has built a substantial lead and headed for her 4th gold medal.
She's ahead of the world record pace by at least half a second, and oh, wait, what's she doing?
I think she's doing a headstand. Why would she do that?
She's stopping. She stopped.
I've never seen
She was so
anything
close
like
to the
this.
finish, and she stopped. I mean, this is unbelievable. Yeah, I've never.
STEM is the discipline of hard numbers, precise, no margin for error.
Dare to forget that. Dare to have fun with it. Get weird with it. Dare to get messy, or just mess it up. Dare to program something internet-breaking, record-breaking. Dare to blow their minds. Dare to try. Dare to fail. Dare to keep daring. Dare to learn the difference between organic, sedimentary, and non-foliated metamorphic rock. Get outside, find those rocks. Dare to be homeroom famous, a high school fable. Dare to send those old STEM theories flying past the neighbor's house into outer space. And for the love of STEM, dare bigger. Dare to code, dare to invent, dare to explore, dare to STEM. Check out She Can STEM to get started.
Your blood pressure numbers could change your life. Talk to your doctor about creating a plan that works better for you. Start taking the right steps at manageyourbp.org.
It's time to make an informed decision about COVID-19 vaccines. The dangerous new Delta variant is more than twice as contagious as the original virus and can affect anyone. Right now, 9 out of 10 hospitalizations and deaths from COVID are among unvaccinated people. Getting vaccinated might save your life, and there's now an option that's fully approved by the FDA. Learn more at getvaccineanswers.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Morgan Jameson. Today we are joined by Karla Bruce, who's the Chief Equity Officer for Fairfax County Government. Karla, thank you.
Hi, Morgan. Thank you.
Absolutely. So earlier in the show, you mentioned that the work of the county is both internal and external, and I just wanted to ask a little bit about how the internal organizational structure is managed and handled, because there's so much going on that there's only so much one person can do. How do you pull it all off? How do you do it all, Karla?
Yeah, so this is, this role, I should talk a little bit about how I'm situated, because that really speaks to how we are able to do this across our whole organization. So my role is situated in the county executive's office. I report to the county executive directly, which gives me the ability to work with him, our county executive, Brian Hill, but also his team of deputy county executives, which oversees public safety, planning and development, health and human services, administration. And so all the functions of the county, and they each have a portfolio of agencies that they oversee. Each of those agencies has, as I said earlier, an equity lead. Now, these equity lead roles are roles that are sort of other duties as assigned, so to speak. They were framed to be that way. But what they are responsible for was initially getting trained, right? Getting training in the key concepts of government's role in advancing equity and really understanding the historical context around how inequity has been produced. And then they worked very closely with their department leadership and equity teams that they formed in their departments on equity plans. And those plans have goals and activities that are used to track our progress across, each year, establishing sort of what are the inequities that we see within our particular field of work, and what are the particular steps that are going to be taken for us by us in a given year to address those challenges. It's also where we find the opportunity for linkages across departments so that we can strategically integrate our policy and practice. So beyond, my role, and I also have a very small team of staff who I work with, a staff person who helps me in orchestrating this broad network of equity leads of, I think there's probably 70 plus equity leads because some departments have more than one. But also a staff person focused on community engagement, and another staff person focused on data analysis, in particularly GIS mapping, to give us the ability to know where in the county we are seeing inequity, and we can support our departments with that type of data. And so that structure is what we call our One Fairfax core team, with the addition of another group of staff who volunteered to be ambassadors. And those staff are staff that we've trained to be able to train others in the organization. So they're the ones who have learned about equity, and again, government's particular role in advancing equity, and are now training staff across the departments. So we have a growing number of staff in our organization who are familiar with these concepts and who have the business area expertise, and now the ability to conduct an equity analysis, which is really key. Because while I know that inequity exists and I know how to conduct an equity analysis, I don't have the business area expertise across all the functions of government. It's really important that that capacity gets built at the departmental level. So this becomes not just my role, but the role of everyone in our organization.
That's really fantastic. Your ability to recognize that and empower those around you to strengthen the work that you are doing, which is a perfect segue to my next question. What are some of the goals that you are working on? May they be immediate, short-term, or obviously the long-term goal here is to do the best that we can to eliminate inequity. But what are some of those, immediate and short-term goals that you're working on? And I do believe that we have a slide for this too.
Yes, I think we do.
Let's see if we can get that up.
Well, I can just go ahead and start while we work to get it up. I think of our goals as falling into two categories. So a set of process goals, which really speak to our ability as an organization to be able to consider equity, right? So we adopted a policy that says we will do that. Then how effectively are we able to consider equity in our planning and decision making? Because at the end of the day, what we're doing is producing information for our board of supervisors to make policy decisions around. And so our ability as staff to be able to look at our work and think about it from an equity perspective, so that the information that we are producing enables our board to make informed decisions is really important. So that process work, I think, is where those process goals are really important, just to be able to assess, are we building that capacity? And then based on data about how we're doing as a county, we have to be able to set goals based on our understanding of the inequity. So one really important way that we are doing that is through the adoption of our countywide strategic plan. So this year, our county adopted its first strategic plan. And through that strategic plan, we have identified community areas of focus. So those areas that we want to see success for Fairfax County more broadly. And so across those 10 areas, and I won't name them all, but they cover things like safety and security and health and lifelong learning and education and in the environment, all things that are priority across our community. But what we do, and this is why I wanted to share this illustration, is that we want to set broad goals for all of Fairfax County, all of its 1.2 million people in all of its 409 square miles. But we recognize, as we said earlier, is that there's an uneven landscape there, right? There people have different outcomes, and people are in conditions and communities are different. By setting these broader goals and also acknowledging that there is structural inequity in our community, it allows us to develop high-level strategies that are meant to advance success for everyone in the county, but to also take into consideration that structural inequity that exists and build opportunity structures and targeted responses aimed at addressing those structural inequities. That concept is called targeted universalism. And so we want to, again, think about the goals, the things that we have for success. So, or the things that where we want to see success. So from an equity perspective, and when you think about where we see the deepest inequity, that really falls across 5 areas. So we're focusing on cradle to career success. We're focusing on community health and well-being. We're focusing on community safety and justice. We're focusing on equitable development. And ultimately, we're focusing on inclusive prosperity, because going back to what we talked about originally, Fairfax County is a great place to live, learn, work, and play. There is a lot of opportunity that exists in Fairfax County. And comparatively speaking, this is, when we say we experience inequity, I frankly think that we can solve this problem, right? Because of the opportunities that exist here. People desire to be here and again, are here because of the available opportunity. What we want to do is just make sure that opportunity is available to everyone. So we're doing work across all the departments, and all the departments have strategies that they're implementing. But I would say that they fall into the category of either process related goals that are really building up our capacity to consider equity, or they fall across those 5 areas. So that final area I wanted to mention is this idea of inclusive prosperity, right? So when you think about building opportunity as it relates to housing or transportation or education or health, and you think of how all those things begin to fit together, they really fit together to enable people to be able to participate fully in our community, to be able to participate fully in our economy. People, I would say across the board, have the strong desire to support themselves, to support their families, to contribute in meaningful ways to the community, and again, create this Fairfax County where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and live to their fullest potential. So that's the idea of inclusive prosperity. And again, how we look to connect opportunity across all the opportunities areas to understand ultimately, are people able to fully participate in our economy?
That's fantastic. And I know it's not just a matter of, making sure bus routes are available, but making sure people can use, the multimodal. And there's just so much intersectionality when it comes to equity. And as you and I have discussed previously, you have to name the problem in order to address it. So in order to fix something or work on it, you have to first be able to identify it and call it by its name. So I think that the level that you are doing across the board here, within those 40 plus departments and with all those people and ambassadors, to really build up that capacity is fantastic, and you should be commended for that. So thank you so much for
those folks that are doing the hard work. Really should be commended, because again, I have the role of Chief Equity Officer, but these folks have other titles and have taken on this responsibility, and also the responsibility of championing it within their organization. So I am so thankful for this team of county employees who I have had the privilege to count as a part of our One Fairfax core team.
Fantastic. And I would love to get them on the show at some point. If you ever want to make a recommendation, we'd love to hear from them about what it is, the work that they are doing and how they are trying to accomplish it. So, along that line, what are some of the struggles and challenges and obstacles you've encountered in this role? And, how have you overcome some of them, but how are you, what are some of the ones that you're still trying to address?
Yeah. So, I will tell you, I came into this role in June of 2018 with, an initial sort of infrastructure building plan to really build up that capacity to consider inequity. But as we all know, by the time we got to early 2020 and we were hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, it really put us in a position to, do the work, right? And as the pandemic really revealed its impacts on our community, we saw that there were clearly disproportionate impacts to different segments of our community. So it was real evidence of the inequity that existed in our community. One of the things the chairman of our board did that I think was, really important is that as we were dealing with the operational crises of the pandemic, he invited a group of over 40 residents, subject matter experts, institutional leaders to form what we call the Chairman's Task Force on Equity and Opportunity. And that group was convened in September of 2020, again, right in the midst of the pandemic, to help us to understand what are the drivers of the inequity we're seeing, again, because we were starting to see in terms of who was exposed to the COVID-19 virus, who was losing their jobs, who wasn't able to telework, who was most at risk. We were beginning to see very clear trends of inequity. And so that group was really instrumental in helping us to identify sort of what those key drivers of inequity are. And so they produced a set of 20 recommendations. In those recommendations, I have viewed as sort of overarching. One, as they sort of underscored sort of where we knew there was inequity, but as the group, put forward, it's not just what you do, but it's how you do it. And so their recommendations have been really useful in helping us to think about not just what to do, but how to do it. So, and we're continuing to use their recommendations, and we're taking a number of actions to implement the recommendations that they put forward. But one particular example that I could offer is again, how we have applied an equity perspective in our COVID-19 response. And we've, again, this is a consideration that's been happening across the full organization. And so again, those equity leads help their departments to think about what they would do or how they should respond to the impacts of COVID-19. But one particular thing that we've done is we formed what we call our vaccine equity strategy team. And so that team has really worked across departments, the health department, our public health organization, but also our Department of Neighborhood and Community Services, to bring together, the best thinking and the best information to help us to understand, again, who are the folks that are, removed or have less access to opportunities to receive the vaccine. So if you'll remember, early on in the pandemic, or early on in the vaccine distribution, there wasn't very much vaccine to go around. So we had to think about how we would make sure that the vaccine was reaching those parts of the population who were most at risk, the ones who continued to work, the ones who couldn't telework. So this group was instrumental in helping us to build that infrastructure to reach that population. We're continuing to tap into their expertise in relationships, because that group also formed very strong relationships with the community, again, recognizing that we didn't hold the insights about how to do this ourselves. We had to talk to community leaders who had trusted relationships in the community that could help us to overcome some of those barriers, either communications barriers or the types of barriers that emerge when you have a lack of information. So again, applying that vaccine equity strategy has been really important. The other area that I think we've really invested a lot of energy in is in our housing policy. So one perspective is just to acknowledge that there is a continuum of housing options in the county. So there are folks who are stably housed, right? And there are folks at the other end of this spectrum who are experiencing homelessness. And so applying an equity lens and understanding who those people are and why they are experiencing homelessness has been one part of our equity strategy. But our current thing, and the thing that I'm really excited about, is how much our RHA, in our Department of Housing and Community Development, have centered equity in their work, acknowledging that of all of the barriers to opportunity, lacking housing really is one of those foundational barriers. And so their housing strategy, and particularly their affordable housing strategy, has been really important. So on one hand, they are seeking to ensure that affordable housing is available in the areas of opportunity that exist in the county. And that's really important because, again, we want people to be able to access jobs, to be able to access childcare, to be able to, access recreation and cultural opportunities, and those opportunities exist, and affordable housing should be in those places. But in the areas where it's lacking, where we see the higher concentrations of affordable housing, it's not just about placing affordable housing in those areas, but it's about thinking about that other layer of opportunities that need to go around it, to supplement it, to make sure that opportunity is available. And housing has been very cooperative in working with our community, in working with the development community, in working across agencies to ensure that it's not just about delivering housing, but delivering housing that also is connected to opportunity. And so we talk about that as, again, these ideas of communities of opportunity, and that has been a central element of their housing strategy.
And it's not just a matter of the as you said, the housing concentrations, it's what's around the housing opportunities there, and bringing some of those jobs or those cultural opportunities, and really diversifying that. So when the county considers future development, having mixed development opportunities, so that way you have a fully robust community and constituency there. And there's been many stories and articles and scholarly works that have been published around this, saying that when you have mixed diverse communities rather, of not just socioeconomic but cultural backgrounds and everything, that communities thrive. So I think that that's a fantastic way to put that. I want to circle back a little bit for a second about the COVID disparities and inequities that you were mentioning. You mentioned community leaders, and I want to ask a little bit about what that means when we say community leaders with trusted voices. Is that faith community leaders? Is that HOA presidents? Is that nonprofit leaders? What is a community leader, and is it necessarily the community where they live, or is it the community where they are and making an impact? How do you find these people to do that? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I'll say all the above and then some. I think particularly throughout the pandemic, our health department and our Department of Neighborhood and Community Services have really, worked on existing relationships. Again, these relationships were in place prior to the pandemic, which is how we were able to build upon them during the pandemic, but expanded them even more because many in the community reached out wanting to find ways that they could be helpful to their neighbors during this difficult time. So, I think everyone is a community leader. So you think about, who you are and where you live, but also sort of your sphere of influence. Who are you connected to through your school? Where do you shop? Where do you, what house of worship might you be affiliated with? And so, what we found is that people were much more likely to receive information through trusted networks than through, hearing from the government. And so these folks played a really important role in a number of different roles throughout the pandemic. So I mentioned earlier the vaccine strategy, but we also had a very robust effort around housing stability for people that may have lost their income during the pandemic. And so being able to connect to resources that would enable them to stay housed. And our nonprofit partners really stepped in and, helped to connect to people and deliver resources, particularly to people who before the pandemic were doing fine and, found themselves in a very unfamiliar situation with the lack of awareness and inability to navigate a system that they weren't accustomed to accessing. And so, that sphere of influence and the networks that you are a part of, even if you don't think about them as, for purposes of helping others, they really can be effective in helping people to get connected to the information and the resources, particularly in times like this when they're facing so many challenges.
Absolutely, that's really fantastic, and yeah, everyone has the power of their network. Those who you know and trust and interact with. It's important to know what influence you have or ability you have to share things. For people who want to get involved or learn more about the work that you are doing, and by the way, before I get into that, congratulations on being in this role and doing it trial by fire throughout this pandemic. It sounds like you are really doing a bang up job with your entire team and all those volunteers that you work with. So thank you once again.
I appreciate that.
If somebody wants to volunteer, if somebody wants to get involved or learn more or something else, may they be county staff or county resident or somebody who just works here, how can they learn more? How can they get involved? What can they do to be impactful?
Yeah, well, there is a One Fairfax webpage. And so I would encourage folks to pay attention there. That gives some basic information. We're actually in the midst of revamping it, and hopefully it'll be more reflective of real-time opportunities in the near future. But so definitely pay attention to the One Fairfax webpage. But, I often share with people, we're doing a lot of work related to equity, but you don't have to be directly connected to the county's efforts to be doing this important work. And again, think about what you see in your community and ask yourself, are you comfortable with what this looks like? And if you say you're not, you're uncomfortable with what this looks like, following that same sort of methodology that I described earlier, sort of figuring out who else should be involved, figuring out sort of what the data or information, what you can get to know about a particular issue. And then that normalized, organized, operationalized framework, I think, is not just unique to government. I think it's something that can apply in the community as well. A number of the nonprofits in our community have taken on equity as a focus. And so I think checking out what's happening with nonprofits in your local community is another way to get engaged. But if there are, as it relates to the county, if there are specific county policies that you would like to see that would advance equity, or you'd just like to get a sense of what the inequities are, I think, paying attention to what's happening in the public process, listening in to board meetings and committee meetings, getting involved, whether through a board, authority, or commission or some other, organized body around particular policy issues. I think those are the ways to become more familiar with what's going on and to begin to get engaged. But again, you can connect with the county, but there are definitely steps that can be taken within your own circles and your own spheres of influence.
Karla, thank you so much for sharing. Definitely opportunities for people to get involved. I'm Morgan Jameson, your host for Inside Scoop. Today we were joined by Karla Bruce, who's the Chief Equity Officer for Fairfax County Government. Karla, thank you so much for joining. Look forward to having you back on the show.